Recording. Okay, here we go. Five, four, three.
Okay, very good. It is 7:26 p.m. and we'll rejoin the meeting. The final informational item for the evening is 6.4, and this is a district update on the PSD response to COVID-19 and planning for the 2021 school year. So again, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Smyser.
Yeah, thank you for this time to just go over, make you perhaps more aware of some things you may not be as aware of, and also just to keep you informed, and you can tell us what you're hearing as well. I have to say, before I turn it over to Scott, I have to say thanks to him. He has served this entire time as the operations person in charge of our COVID response, which was a big job to put on his shoulders just overnight, and he's just been fantastic. So thank you, Scott, for everything that you continue to do, and we're much appreciated.
Thanks, Sandra. Thanks, President Fev. Good to be back with this group again this evening. Sandra gave me credit, but in reality, there's just lots of great people, and I'm going to talk about tonight who's done some great things from this leadership team, but across the system. Mostly, when you think about the big change, it's been teachers shifting from in-person to out-of-person. So with that, I think we'll go ahead. I just have a few slides. I'll talk around the slides a little bit. And then ultimately, we want to get in some dialogue with you. We'll invite Matt and Dustin and Dave and Todd, all of which have played huge roles in our response to help answer your questions or whatever you're wondering about. So I'll kick it off with moving to the first slide. As you know, are aware of, March 13th was our last day. We had students in the building. And really what we had was 2 days to prep. We told people on that Wednesday, the next 2 days, they needed to take everything they needed for the rest of the year home. And we even were talking that there was rumors out in the system that we were saying that because we wouldn't be back. But we as a district hadn't made a decision to not be back on March 12th even. We made that decision late March 12th. And so that all happened super fast. We made the decision to give our teachers that first week after break to get their bearings, and we moved forward. And teachers have done a phenomenal job. I'd like to recognize Kate Canine and her PD department is also creating lots of opportunities for teacher training. We've had, I think, close to 1,400 teacher trainings in the last several weeks that have happened during the school day in this environment. Again, our PD department had to shift their gears. Much of the LST team spent that spring break rather than on spring break thinking about, okay, what does remote learning look like? What do we need to do to get up to speed? And so a lot of that happened really at light speed when you think about how fast things happen in education. And this system responded very well. Tonight I want to talk a little as we think about remote learning where we are today. We have openly talked about this Thursday being the last day of new instruction for our elementary students, with the calendar having the 15th as a teacher workday. So our last day for new instruction for our elementary students will be this Thursday. And our last day for new instruction for our middle school and high school students will be this Friday. Part of the reason we did that was we, beginning with the end in mind, we wanted to have an opportunity for students and staff to pick up all the stuff that they had left in school, assuming we'd be back in school. We still have lockers that are full at middle and high school. We still have gym lockers that are full. And so we wanted to make sure we could get that stuff back to students. We wanted to be able to hand out yearbooks and do some of the closure activities that don't require group activities. We wanted to be able to get students their cap and gown and the senior kinds of things. And so when we start to look at the environment that we have to do that in, it required us to think backwards. And so we've given lots of opportunities, lots of directions. I will say teachers from the get-go, we asked for them to make this about a connection opportunity, not just about academics. Obviously, we talk connections all the time. This was asking teachers to connect with students much differently, to make sure that it really was relationally driven, and teachers all over the system responded. We get emails often from parents that celebrate what's happened with parents or what's happened with their students. And that's at all levels, our elementary, our middle, and our high school. Teachers have really stepped out beyond the academics and worked hard to build relationships with kids. The other piece that I think is important is to think about that whole connection piece. The teachers are doing more work together as well. They're doing work with each other in this environment as well, which I think is pretty neat when you think about our teachers hadn't really spent much time in this environment either. They hadn't done this kind of work before. They hadn't, in most cases, hadn't used this type of meeting before. Now they're doing their teacher development. They're doing their lesson planning with their peers. They're meeting with kids and driving instruction through this environment. They're checking for understanding, having students record their work in this environment so they can then take a look and monitor progress that students have through remote learning environments. That's pretty neat to think about the connections they've made in all three different ways. The other piece I wanted to make sure you're aware of, we talked as a group before. I think Robert led the conversation about graduation requirements, and we created a waiver that we could use as we move through it. And we heard some pretty empowering statements from some of the board around we want to make sure we do what's right by students. And I can say already as we move toward the end date, we've already got students that we have waived some of the expectations for based on what was happening in their lives, what was happening in their families. Principals have a spreadsheet that we've created so that ultimately we can share the data with the board. Robert has already gone in to approve some of the things that we've waived, so we've been able to share with some students already that they've met the criteria for graduation, given the stuff that was interfering for those individual students. Our date that we would like the majority of that to happen is next Friday. Next Friday, sorry. And that gives us time the following week to go in, make sure that the reporting on the backside of that is correct as we try to get the transcripts and the report cards to all line up. We've given ourselves a week to do that. And so the requirements pieces is well underway. And again, we thank the board for the flexibility that you've given us to do what we believe is right by students. We'll have more input on that as we see what all the waivers look like. But we're proud to report we've already got some in the system, and Robert's already been able to go in and approve some of those already. We talked briefly at one point with the board about this being a needs assessment, and one of the things we recognize, we talk about it a lot, we've talked about it several times tonight, equity is a big challenge. And when you go to remote learning, and we have expectations we set in person, and everybody goes to remote learning, the expectations are challenged because we had so many students that didn't have access to what we were asking them to do. We did ask at all three levels. Todd asked the elementary and I asked the secondary, first and foremost, to reach out and find out who has connection and who doesn't. And we were relatively successful, and it created, that became a needs assessment for us. The district ordered, I think we've got 250 MiFi devices in right now. They've only been in about a week and a half or 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks now. It all runs together in my head. We're in the process of moving those out, and some of them will continue to allow students to use throughout the summer. So we'd like particularly high school students, to have access to high school credit-bearing summer school classes remotely. And we believe if we can allow them to have MiFi devices in an environment where they don't have access, they may be able to access. And we'd like to provide adult support for that. So we're working with John McKay's team to figure out a model for some of our students to continue to have access. In return, access to high school credit. They get to keep the MiFi in our device for the summer. And that's a few devices, but it may allow a few students to get credit where they normally wouldn't have access to doing that. So that's something we're playing with, and that could be a model for us in future years to think about how does that look different in general. The MiFis will be up here, they're ours, and we'll have to figure out how do we use those to be a benefit to our district in the fall. But in addition to that, we had large areas, tended to be our mobile home parks, that we recognized fairly quickly. I think the first day we had 172 students in one trailer park that were minus access. And so we, with a team, Dustin, Matt, put together their teams, and they worked very swiftly to try to get a solution. Our solution ended up being we took some of our old vehicles, we put Wi-Fi devices on them, and we rolled them out and parked them in the mobile home parks. And that became our first endeavor into that, with a park up north on College. The Poudre Valley Mobile Home Park was our first adventure. We did some of that with our equipment, and we brought in a company to work alongside us, and so we had some of their equipment and some of our equipment, and so troubleshooting proved to be, is it our fault, is it their fault? So we identified 7 other mobile home parks, and we ended up working with that company, and we used their solution, the same model where we used our vehicles to go out and get it started. And again, within about 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks, we had all 8 mobile home parks with at least a hotspot inside the park that allowed all the students in that neighborhood to at least walk to access. It's not a solution in the sense we didn't get Wi-Fi in every mobile home, which would be ideal. We didn't make that happen. We got them something close that at least allowed them to have access. They didn't have to get out and drive to go find a hotspot somewhere. Along came the partnership with the city. Dustin and his team have done a great job of working with the city. The city has been fantastic at coming alongside PSD and trying to figure out how do they use the connection build out they have planned. They're doing it in a different order, I think, than they were planning on, but they really tried hard to get it close to the mobile home parks that we were in Fort Collins City. So we've got several of our mobile home parks now that are much faster than they were the original, because they're now using the fiber that the city pulled to those mobile home parks. The city continues to want to work with us. I think you saw the paper. They were very complimentary of Dustin and his team, but we want to reciprocate. They've been awesome. From the early days, they were interested in what we were doing. They recognize, as we do, that that is an equity challenge for our community to solve. And that's awesome that it's not PSD trying to solve that by ourselves, that ultimately we have to figure out how to do that, because let's face it, in all of our schools, we're asking students to do things at home, and we've been asking students to do things at home, and in many cases, or in some of these cases, students haven't had access to do what we've been asking them to do at home, and so we learn that we can continue to improve in that, and I think we've made some strides forward in understanding that through this needs assessment that was thrown in our lap starting in late March. All right, let's move on to slide 2. So one of the things that drove the 15th as the end of the year for secondary and the 14th for end of the year for elementary is I talked about needing to clean out buildings. And all of that we recognized as we started having conversations a couple months ago was going to be a long endeavor. For our big high schools, they have schedules that are going to take them 7 or 8 days to get all their kids in, to get their stuff cleaned out. And so Fossil Ridge, for instance, will start their clean out Monday the 18th. and they won't be done until Thursday, the 28th of May, or yeah, of May. So they've got 2 days for seniors, 2 for juniors. And when you started to build a plan like that and think about social distancing, we're going to have between 25 and 30 students in any building at any one time. All of them going in with distance, all of them going in with masks, all of them with the expectation and staff to support that they're getting their stuff, collecting their belongings, picking up their yearbook, turning in their laptops, and doing all that with social distance as a requirement. So when we started to look at the timing, we needed the backward map and give ourselves enough time to pull that off. So the secondary schools will start their locker cleanouts, picking up stuff next Monday. Some of the smaller schools will start Tuesday. We've got one starting Wednesday. Most of our schools that are not the comprehensive high schools will be done next Friday. Our comprehensive high schools are going into the following week. And we have one middle school that's going into that Tuesday because they had some gift for 8th graders that won't be delivered until next Friday that they wanted to make sure 8th graders could pick up. So we have schedules for each school, but all of them living in the social distancing world, all of them requiring masks to get in the buildings, all of them having turn-in of stuff outside the building, and the majority of them allowing kids to go in one at a time, so there'll be 20, 25 kids in the entire building, with the exception of a few secondaries that were able to bag and tag because they had lockers that were not shared. We have a few buildings at the secondary level that lockers are singles, so you'd know it's Scott Nielsen's locker. You could put my stuff in my bag, tag it with my name, and those schools are able to hand the stuff outside, so the kids won't even have to go in the buildings. The buildings with shared lockers, that was much more comprehensive to try to pull that off. And we tried thinking about, could we video conference with all 2,000 students and make sure we get the right stuff? And we just couldn't come up with an economical or efficient way to pull it off. So we're going to go with a few students in the building. We've worked with the health department. They're comfortable with our plan. And so that's what secondary will be doing. At the elementary level, elementary teachers will be in the buildings on Tuesday next week. And they'll be pulling stuff together, doing their close of the year. But they're going to bag and tag all the elementary student stuff from their desks. It's much easier, much more contained. So they can put together a bag for Scott Nielsen. And then the families will come in an orderly fashion on Wednesday, and they'll pick up the stuff outside. So the families will pick their stuff up in a planned way on Wednesday, and then the teachers can be back in the building on Thursday to do their final closeout, and then elementaries will be out of the buildings Thursday or Friday, depending on how long they need to close out their time frame. So that's our building cleanout. Our laptop and textbook collection will happen in conjunction with that. The elementary laptop collection will happen next week on the 19th, Wednesday, and the secondaries will happen during the time frame they're asked to come back to the school to pick up their stuff. They'll come back, turn in their laptops. We're going to scan them in, and then we're going to let them sit. And so that's the laptop textbook collection. I talked also about the report cards just loosely. The report cards for elementary and middle school will be available June 3rd. Our high school report cards not till the end of that week, June, I think it's the 8th. And the reason for that is we wanted to give our high schools enough time to make sure the credits line up, the transcript makes sense, and since we know we've got some waivers at the high school level, we just want to give our registrar and IT department enough time to make sure it all makes sense. It's all legit. We don't have mistakes because they come back to bite us in the future. So we're going to have our elementary middle ready on that Monday, the 3rd, sorry, and then the high school that Friday. In terms of celebrations and graduations, those schools that are doing end of the year celebrations, whether it's kindergarten, 5th grade celebrations, will be happening sometime next week in this environment. Same with 8th grade celebrations. If they're doing them, they'll be in this environment. We've also had many middle schools that have done some kind of visit with 5th graders through this environment. I just watched CLPs the other night. They did a whole 5th grade tour celebration, get to meet the staff through this environment. It lasted about 35, 38 minutes. they did a nice job with it. And again, that was for their incoming fifth graders, so it was neat to see. In addition, graduation is slotted, scheduled to be in person outside on the 24th and 25th of July for 6 of our schools. Polaris, PCA are the 2 small schools that want to go that direction, and the 4 comprehensive high schools have slots, 3 on Friday, 3 on Saturday. We've spaced them out enough so we can clean everything. Right now, those are slotted. We'll communicate out to families. They are just for graduates. They're not for graduates and families. The time we put into just trying to figure out how to get graduates in and out, it would be hard pressed to think how do we do that and get families in and out that we don't really have any control over. And so we're planning on the graduations the 24th and 25th. Centennial is working on their own. They're doing an individual. You can come in your cap and gown in the next 2 weeks and take a picture with your family right outside of Centennial's door. And so that's what Mike is doing. He felt pretty comfortable because they do their stairway graduation that would be a way he could do it. And PGA is still working out the details for theirs. But they didn't want to wait to do it the 24th and 25th of July. So they're looking at what's best for their community. Openly an invitation for all of you, everyone on this screen, to attend graduations the 24th and 25th, and we'll get more details out to you as they become clear for us. We met as a group today. What I can tell you is we will have, in addition to Rob wearing a shirt that matches the school color, we'll have a mask for each of you that is school specific. So they're all getting their graduates a mask, so they'll all have the same mask on. That was intentional because you never know what mask is going to show up if you ask them to wear masks and you don't have much control. And so giving them all a souvenir that my son will have a Fossil Ridge class of 2020 mask is kind of neat and a neat thing in an environment where they're going to have to wear it. So that's something we'll give to all of them, but we'll also have one for each of you as well. As far as we move on to summer 2020, we continue, as we've told the board before, we have the feeding locations right now. We know for sure we're going to go through the end of June feeding, and likely we'll continue into the month of July. We're looking at how we get reimbursement and whether or not that truly comes through that we can get reimbursed for that, and that will make it easier for us to continue through the summer. So we're looking at that. In terms of summer programming, we have partnerships with the City of Fort Collins and Boys and Girls Club, and we're continuing to work with them on buildings. Boys and Girls Club has a couple buildings in town. I think the city has landed on just Riffenburg. We're looking at Riffenburg and Blevins, and I think the last I heard was they're only going to use Riffenburg. But we're in negotiations with both of them around what that looks like. How can they do what they want to do, but ultimately, hopefully, how do they serve our students in doing that, since we won't have our own programming. Athletics and activities. CHASA has loosened up just a little bit, so we can start to do some remote coaching now. We haven't allowed our coaches to do any remote coaching of any kind. Kids could be working out individually. CHASA has now given the flexibility so that a coach could theoretically meet with their team in this environment and help them think about, model what they could do for practices. They also have given us flexibility to do that with incoming ninth graders. But we have still marked our buildings and our fields closed through the month of June. We just don't have enough visibility to know what that's going to look like. So our facilities right now are closed through the month of June, and we'll make a decision as to what we're doing in July, probably middle of June, as to whether we open up for sports stuff to happen back on our campuses. That gives us another 6 weeks to see and read the tea leaves, and ultimately we're going to be doing that anyways to find out whether we can do an in-person graduation. So that's what we'll be doing in terms of summer program and athletics. We do have some construction and renovation that has happened now. We haven't done a lot during this time we've been out of the building, but we have done some from the classroom displays, some other small things. We've had some custodians that have got to jump on some of their um, summer work. I know of at least one gym floor that's been refinished already, but construction and renovation is ongoing, continues to be. We've tried to take advantage of the buildings being open without being risky about that. So there's been this balance. We've had conversations about do we, don't we? We don't want to get reckless about how many people we have in the buildings. So we've tried to be mindful of that while also taking advantage of buildings that are empty. So we have gotten a few things done, but that will continue to be ongoing, both at the big construction sites, but also some of the smaller ones that are out in front of us. All right, and then we'll move to slide 3, and then we'll have a conversation. The big one I think that we hear about now, and you probably are starting to hear also, is there's a large contingent that would like us to make decisions for the fall. We have a group of our LST folk, several principals at the different levels that are starting to pull together options. Todd is leading that work and doing a great job of helping get that organized and letting them know what their charge is. We're hoping we have something we can bring back to the board, a deliverable to the board on that June 9th meeting, where we have some idea, at least at that point, of what we recommend for the fall. If in fact what we're doing in the fall is not in-person all students, which likely we think will not be the case. We have a hard time seeing that between now and then we'll be able to have 2,000 students in a high school with no requirements, no social distancing requirements at all. And so likely what we're looking at is some kind of smaller number. We're hearing lots of different scenarios. Our groups are pulling together multiple scenarios that might be students in buildings every other day, students in buildings every 4th day. Some of that depends on the sandbox we're given or the rules. If our rules are 15-1, we can have 15 students and a teacher in a classroom. That we can have one kind of set of programs. If by chance they say it's 9-1, then the way we have to structure our days are different. We are in the process of sending out a parent survey that will go out this Friday, be collected back next Friday. We've got 10 questions, and it really is around, we want to kind of get a sense of how are you feeling? If in fact we have the ability to have kids back in the building next year, how do you feel about that? If we have the ability to put students on a bus next year, how do you feel about that? And then what might be benefit your family in terms of big picture, looking at what options might your family prefer. So those are questions we're going to ask the families. And we're in the early conversations about a survey that will go out to our staff that will follow shortly behind. So we can gather some input from our staff as they're wrapping up their experiences. We really didn't want to put a survey out to staff when we knew they were knee deep and still doing the instruction. And so we want to put some out to get a sense of what worked well for them, what areas would they improve if they got a chance to do it again. And so we can get some feedback from our teachers as well. All of that will happen in the next couple of weeks, because I told you a deliverable the 9th, that's less than a month away, or 4 weeks from today. So that's quick. As everything in the last 2 months has been, everything is in our face, everything is fast. That's not going to change as we close the year, and certainly not going to change as we try to get some deliverables out to our families. I will also tell you, as we think about the planning and the work that's going in, one of the things that is right in our face is we recognize that even if we have students who are back in the building, we're going to have some subset of the population that are not comfortable with that, and that they're going to be looking at other options. And we need to make sure that the other options they look at are PSD's options, not someone else's. So that's on our radar as well. Some kind of probably full remote learning for some subset of the population in the event we have most kids back in the building. We can't afford, nor do we want to afford, kids to decide they're going to do their remote learning with some other remote learning entity. That doesn't make sense for us. We want them to stay attached to their elementary, middle, or high school. and when they're ready to come back to us, they come back to us. So we've got to have that to partner with whatever the solution in the school is. We also recognize we'll have teachers that are going to have some rationale and reasons they're going to struggle to come back. Either they're immunocompromised, or they're living with someone that is, or they're living with a family member. So we've got all those pieces we're going to have to think through as part of the plan I just talked about, as we think about what options work best for us. I also would put out there child care, taking care of our own teachers' students. If in fact we're going to be in a model where our kids are in our buildings or in buildings 2 days a week, let's just say that's an option that we end up going with. That means students aren't in a building 3 days a week, but teachers are asked to be in a building 5 days a week because there are going to be multiple kids. So we have to think through as a district, how do we take care of our staff? And that's on the radar right now also, is how can we accommodate and make sure that we can take care of those needs as well. So it's complex. We do in PSD, we do normal school pretty well. We can plug and play pretty well. We get started every year pretty well. This is really starting with a blank slate. We got to recreate everything. Master schedule, how we do food, how we transport. Everything is starting from a blank piece of paper because we've never done it before. But we got good people working on it, doing lots of great work. And we look forward to bringing you in 4 weeks a plan that at least at that moment would be what our recommendation looks like it would be for the fall. And with that, I just want to open it up for dialogue, conversations. Ask away, and I'll ask partners to help me out.
All right, very good. Thank you, Scott. I see Naomi's hand up, and then DJ after that. Go ahead, Naomi.
Thank you. This is Naomi. So I think that this really highlights the innovation that we experience in PSD all the time, and it's from the top all the way down with everyone involved. Child nutrition and our transportation services and turning that bus into like a mobile internet. It's been really just astounding, and as a parent, so comforting to know that my kids are getting a great education and still working through it. Speaking as a parent, I can say that even though the work has been so incredible coming from my teachers, it has been a lot, not the quantity of it, the experience has been a lot for my children. And so personally, we made the decision a month ago to stop, maybe about 3 weeks ago, to stop remote learning. And that was a really hard decision for me. And I know that a lot of other parents have been making those decisions as well. So I really appreciate this future look because it is mentally and emotionally hard to do this every day for everyone. And it doesn't matter if it's the teacher or the kindergartner. That kindergartner is still experiencing a global pandemic in their own little emotional way, and that makes it really, really hard for them. So thank you for all of that work. I know that it is just mountainous. We in the district have an online hybrid program. Would we be able to capitalize on that and expand it to meet more students' needs if, for example, some of those students that you're talking about decide that they would prefer to stay remote? Is that something, or does it have to do with like numbers and moving? I'm not sure.
Well, no, Naomi, I think it's a good question. First of all, I want to say well said, because I think you just expressed what lots of people are feeling, right? There's lots of stress. I heard it earlier in the month. This is one of those events that's traumatic for everybody. Every single person's experiencing trauma, not just in PSD, everywhere. But that's something that's got to be on our radar. Parents are, students are, and certainly for us, the more in-person learning next year, the better we think we'll be. We think we're better in an in-person environment. And we also know there'll be some stipulations. In terms of whether PGA could accommodate, ironically, PGA might be in the model that a district ends up in. A couple days a week in the building and a couple days a week at home. Only they may have to switch their model also because they may have to have only half their kids in at any one time. So could they add some people? Sure. I think the people we're most trying to make sure we capture are the people that are nervous or not ready for their kids to be in school at all. And how can we provide an environment that lets them stay attached to, say, they're Preston Pumas. We want them to be Preston Pumas and still on the Preston roster. And so when they're ready to come back, they can slide right into Preston. And so how do we create a model where they can still be part of their home school, which they are right now, but everybody is out. And so how do we have a hybrid that we think about also that's meeting kids' needs differently? But that isn't sorted out by any stretch yet. We've got a lot of work to do to get to a place where that's seamless. And we also hope we'll start to understand how many individuals might ask for that model. And Naomi, in your case, right, we've got others like that. And we'd love to say, how do we get them in the building for whatever you're comfortable with? And then how do we absorb and make the experience at home a little more user-friendly? And maybe it was this year as we learned too. So all of that is part of the planning process that's going on right now. And your feedback just adds to that. Before we do another question, I just want to add, Naomi made me think about it as we're talking about experiences. And I've celebrated many people. Matt, Dustin, Todd may all jump on and answer questions. But one of the individuals that's behind the scenes tonight that isn't going to get out in front and answer questions, that it helps an incredible amount in this district is Lauren Hooton. And Lauren right now is helping lead the planning of all of what we're doing. Lauren once a week is meeting with all the chiefs of staff from around the Denver area. So she's keeping us well informed on what's happening in all the other big districts. But she's also just helping us think through. She's amazing thought partner for all of us. And so I just want to publicly acknowledge the work that Lauren does all the time. And this has not been any different. She continues to be a driver behind what we do. So thanks, Lauren. And I know you're on making this work, but it's appreciated.
Very good. Thank you. And DJ, I think you had a question, and then Rob.
I want to, I guess, first say how appreciative I am of the deep thought that is going into this. And I am very excited by the idea of actually going out and getting the survey from the parents and finding out, what fears and what people are apprehensive about out there, because I think, we're just kind of throwing darts in the dark maybe a little bit if we don't. And so I really appreciate that. And also the fact that we're going to go and ask and talk to our staff. So I just really want to commend you and your team about doing that, because I think it's highly valuable to get that kind of information when we're trying to make the best decisions that we can with little detail sometimes coming out, but just trying to make the best decisions that we can as a group and as a district. So thank you.
You're welcome, DJ. Thanks for saying that. I do want to say one of the things that's interesting about this is we're going to take some surveys. We're going to try to get people's perspectives. But this is weird because we're also going to be told what the stipulations are on the other end. So that's this funny place we're in where we're not going to be able to do exactly what we want. We're going to have some guardrails we're going to have to stay within, and hopefully we'll know what those guardrails are relatively soon. But we do think it's important to hear parents. We think it's important to hear our staff as well. So thanks, DJ.
Okay, great.
So I'm sure you know this. I'll just acknowledge it publicly that we'll get some feedback from parents and students and or parents and staff here in the May-June timeframe, and who knows how they'll feel in August, because We don't know what the nature of second waves of infection are going to be, or treatments, or anything. So I can tell you that, I guess, just speaking personally, if I were to answer such a survey, I would make it conditional in some way. I mean, like, sure, I'd love to have this happen, and it depends on what the environment is at the time. So, having said that, I think it's still worthwhile to do. I think it's important for the reasons that DJ talked about. I think it's important to get their perspective and to have them understand that we do want their perspective. So I think that's all important to do. Please don't take what I'm saying as that's not a valuable activity. I just think the data is going to be fluid. That's all I'm saying about that. So the two questions I have, I assume the funding question on feeding people is a question of what USDA is gonna pay for, right? Because I've seen some things in, I don't know whether it was Chalkbeat or I forget what, but some kind of educational question about not being able to feed kids over the summer because USDA was not counting that as something they were going to reimburse. So is that the issue there?
Matt, you want to take that, or you want me to jump on it?
No, I'll be happy to answer that. I think you can hear me, but maybe not see me.
We can hear you.
Yeah, so we do have permission from the USDA right now to go through June 30th.
Okay.
With the current COVID rules.
Yeah.
There is talk about that being extended. But yeah, we don't see any changes till June 30th in the current permissions that we have, which is very helpful because it is going to allow us and the food bank to partnership most of the summer. But we are putting plans in place, whether USDA extends it or not. We're putting plans in place to continue that as much as possible.
Okay, I appreciate that. The other question was one that I've raised before, and that's this question of professional development for what are the best practices for remote learning. I gather that our PD department, I've always been a great fan of Kate and the work that her department's doing, so I'm not surprised that they're doing great work now. What are the plans to sort of reinforce the best practices as we go into the fall, assuming that remote learning is a possibility, and presumably it also allows our PD department to sort of catch their breath a little bit and find out what the right thing is to be telling the teachers, even based on experiences across the nation, for example.
Good question, Rob, and I think Kate's been very thoughtful, as she always is. But she fairly early on looked at the Summer Institute and some of the things we generally offer as a Summer Institute, which that happens the first and second and sometimes the third week of June, and made a decision. We won't have enough information then to decide what to do for fall because we won't necessarily know what we're driving. And so that in conjunction with budget conversations, we paused the Summer Institute and we'll take some of the money that would have been used for the Summer Institute and allow for training that we're calling more just-in-time training that would happen early in August, likely in this environment. And it will be based around best practices for remote learning, or it will be best practices for learning when you have half your kids in the building and half your kids at home. So it will be driven by what model we decide on, that we share with you. And we've got some time to plan what that training can look like. And then we can do just-in-time training or more just-in-time training when we get into August. So that's what her thinking is. I think it's very smart. I'm sure behind the scenes there's a lot more in her head than that. That's at least enough to, I think, answer your question, Rob.
Yeah, Scott and Sandra and the whole crew, I just want to say thank you. When you were talking, Scott, I wrote down 3 words. The first one was innovation, and I think Naomi covered that pretty darn well. You guys are just innovating this and having that flexibility. I think too that your staff has that flexibility to think in 3 different directions. Are we going to go remote? Are we going to do hybrid? Are we going to be in building? And you're just doing a great job with that, and I appreciate all the work that comes with that, knowing that 2 of your options that you're going to come up with and work out are not going to be what we use. Just given the nature of the beast, right? You have to plan 3 or 4 different ways, and you're only going to use one of them. So thank you for that. The second word I wrote down was equity. And the reason I wrote that down is because one of the things that I think COVID-19 has done for us, silver lining, right? But it has highlighted the inequities that we have in our community, within PSD, all of things that maybe we took for granted. And I truly believe that right now we have the ability to look at that inequity and say, as a board, as a district, as a community, that we're not going to accentuate those inequities. We're going to make them smaller. We're going to bring the community together. And I feel like a lot of what you're discussing here, everything from the Futures Lab to the budget to child nutrition to, most of the conversations we've had today, we are focusing on equity, and I want to make sure that we keep that focus on equity. So whether we're talking about everybody coming back or only half the kids in the building, whatever it is that we're focusing on that equity, and I hear that when you're talking. So thank you for that as well. The third thing I wrote down, not one word, but in-person learning equals social emotional learning. And so what I'm hoping with that, what we can do is if we're doing a hybrid situation, when kids are in class with their teachers, if we can truly focus, whether we're talking about kindergarten or whether we're talking about 12th grade, that we are focused on that social emotional piece when they're in the building with a teacher, because that is a safe place for them, and they may not have a safe place outside of that building to have those kinds of discussions. So yes, math is important, and yes, English is important, and yes, Spanish is important, and yes, all of those things are tremendously important, and you can't start learning without having that solid base of a social emotional place. That solid base. You can't worry about trigonometry if you're worried about what's going on in the world. You have to be able to have a safe place to talk about that. And then I just want to say that the last thing too is that it's truly inspiring to hear that you're worried about your staff as well as your students. So when you're talking about, if you're doing a hybrid situation, but the staff is going to be there 5 days a week, what do we do about their kids? And what do we do about childcare? So the fact that you're thinking about those things it is huge. I think we have to be very appreciative that we are, I think, on the board, and that you work for such an environment that's the focus. So I just wanted to say thank you for all of that.
Thanks, Kristen.
And
well said.
Hey, this is the night of a lot of Naomi talk. So I completely agree that social emotional learning is super important, and again, I think that that's one of the reasons why this was so hard for my own children, and why Laura Spots and Stephanie Coleman, name dropping moment, called me and said, your kid is not the same. These are some things that I'm seeing, and I'm really worried about your child. And so it's a totally new experience that we're all going into. And perhaps this is what I have been trying to point to, maybe a little bit inelegantly, is that we don't know what we're going to be walking into in the fall, and we don't know what that is going to look like, or what other sorts of costs are going to be associated with that, or what other types of curriculum we might need to purchase in that last minute to best support students. And so being cautious moving forward is what I'm trying to advocate for, because what we're looking at today is not what we were looking at 6 weeks ago, and it is very likely not what we are going to be looking at 3 weeks from now. And so I want to empower the district to make those decisions to best support our students. And I want to make sure that the funds are there if we say, you know what, we're going to need 2 more little internet vans to drive around. We're going to need to extend the hours of our school day to best support students. So we're going to need to pay more electricity, you know, I mean, things like that. We don't know what it's going to look like. And I want to make sure that we don't get stuck with, well, this is the best solution, but we can't have it because we bought turf. That's just an example. So thank you.
Great. Other board comments? Okay. I'm just going to throw in my 2 cents and then jump in on this. Yeah, it's really has been an amazing time when I think of how many things have been on our minds and consuming us since the month of March. And I know that that budget has just been huge. But I will say that in conversations I've been having as well, the idea of not having face-to-face time with kids and having them behind screens in the fall seems almost implausible. And it's not to say that we're not a resilient community and that our kids are not amazing and that families can't pull it all together, but the stories I'm hearing of how difficult it is as we go on, and that was when the connections were in place. So to begin in this kind of environment seems very troubling. And I say this with a little bit of emphasis towards, to the extent that the district has options in hand, I will probably lean a little bit towards taking some risk in making this happen. Otherwise, I don't see education happening in any real solid way next year, and the social emotional concerns are just mounting for the community, and I'm hearing about that as well. But all that said, I think, you know, the thank yous are huge, but I want to remind all of us that by the time we meet next time, schools will be closed. And so I just want to make sure we say thank you from the board for what teachers and staff have done. When we next meet, you guys will be done. You'll have done it, and it's just, it's so huge. It's hard to say thank you enough. Again, while being in the crosshairs of a budget crisis, the amount of giving and effort that goes on in this district is just unbelievable. So I won't do an applaud, but I just say 2 thumbs up from the board. Thank you, thank you, thank you to everybody who has held us all together to get us to the end here. And Scott, thanks for your presentation and for leading the way and guiding us all to keep this all together. So, okay, with that, why don't we call that an end of 6.4, and that brings us to the last item for the evening, which is 7.0, which is an executive session. So I just forwarded the email. Great. If I could.
Naomi moves that the board enter executive session for the purpose of developing the strategy of the school district for negotiations related to the 2020-2021 collective bargaining agreement or employment contracts as authorized by Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-402, subsection 4E3. Those invited to join the board and superintendent in executive session are Assistant Superintendents Todd Lambert and Scott Nielsen, Executive Directors Vicki Thompson and Dave Montoya, Budget Manager Brett Parsons, Legal and Policy Counsel Autumn Aspen, and Board Assistant Secretary Jill Bruner.
Great, thank you. I have a second for that motion. I have a second from Kristen.
DJ Anderson.
DJ votes aye.
Nate Donovan.
Nate Donovan votes aye, and thanks to all the educators.
Kristen Draper.
Kristen Draper votes aye, and dittos Nate.
Christoph Bev, Naomi Johnson,
Naomi Johnson votes aye and understands that DJ also really loves teachers and is bummed out that he was first.
Rob Petter,
Yeah, Rob votes aye. I love Naomi's sign and the sentiment that it conveys.
Carolyn Reed,
Carolyn votes aye. Thank you, everybody.
motion passes 7-0.
Okay, very good. So just to be clear for those people who are not invited to join the board in executive session, when this session has concluded, all we'll do is the board will briefly come back out and we will vote to, or we'll adjourn the meeting. So this will be the last thing we will be doing in public other than adjournment of the meeting. So thank you all for your attendance.